Hey everybody, it's Sean Gibbons from the Communications Network. Nice to be with you on a very, very warm summer day, depending upon where you're at. Actually, I think almost everywhere in the country is pretty darn warm just about today. You are here because you are probably keen to learn about a survey the Communications Network did in partnership with our friends at Atlantic 57, and I'm going to be handing off to Hugh and Kelly in just a quick minute. But as we always do, we want to make a little room for folks to enter the room as y'all are coming in now. Nice to see y'all. We typically do something. First, I'm going to do something I always do, and I always get at some point. Someone's going to tell me to turn it down, but I'm going to play you a little Beatles. You might know this song. Just let this play while folks are coming into the room. And as you're coming in, do me a favor. Let's all go into the chat. You'll find that just down at the bottom of your screen. You hover with your finger or whatever it is you use to manipulate your computer. Go ahead and click open that chat box. And let's make sure it's all set for everybody. You're going to be talking to all panelists and attendees. It may be preset to something else. So make sure you're talking to everybody. And then just go ahead and let's do something. We've been borrowing an idea from Professor Brene Brown, and that's this two-word check-in. Oh, I'm glad you like it, Alri. Beatles are not a bad way to start an afternoon. Go ahead, Alri, maybe you can start for us. 2 words to describe how you're feeling, where you are, who you are, where you're coming in from, and then 2 words describing how you're feeling. Let's go ahead and start throwing those into the chat. And while you're doing that, I'll do this as well. Hi, it's Sean. Hot and optimistic, if I can type properly. Jenny, how are you? Depressed but optimistic. Yeah, these polarities. Everybody seems to have them. Ari, how are you? Hopeful and tired. Sarah, Ari, how are you? Recharging and lunch. Or is that a lunch that's recharging you, my friend? Others, go ahead and hop in. Lyric Opera of Chicago. Gosh, Sarah, y'all are having a lot going on in the arts community right now. Feeling scattered and cautious. I get it. And your city's been going through quite a lot. If the headlines are to be believed, certainly hope that the federal government's not sending folks your way. Sarah, how are you? Oh, that's a heart, I think. Aloha. Carly from Hawaii. Boy, will you adopt all of us, Carly? Overwhelmed but positive. Michelle up in Needham, Mass, stressed and edgy, and I think y'all are pretty hot today, if I'm not mistaken. Kirsten, how are you? Overwhelmed and hot, yeah. Dale, how are you up in Washington? Temporarily exhausted. Hey, what's going on, Tanya? How you going? Going full steam and probably broiling in Pennsylvania, I'm guessing. Jessica, how are you, my friend? Abby, Jamie. All right, keep chatting, everybody. Let's just go ahead and be in community with one another. We'll be able to talk to one another. And in fact, I should probably tell you all this. We're going to call on you. Hey, Anusha, Andre. We're going to call on y'all during the course of this to kind of talk amongst yourselves and share a little bit. We got some findings that we want to make sure we not only hear from what the data tells us, but what y'all can testify to yourselves. Hey, David, how are you? All right, so with that, Mr. T, if you'll take us forward, I'm going to turn the Beatles down a little bit. If you're looking for this number, it's on Abbey Road, which is my favorite record from the Beatles. Gina, how are you? Local groups. The New York group had a fantastic virtual meeting this morning. Jackie and Catherine, how are you? Later this week, our friends in Denver will be gathering, and our friends in Seattle are doing a very special session with our friend Dr. Clarence Jones, who helped to write the Dream Speech with Martin Luther King. If y'all are interested in joining, great if you're in the Seattle and Denver area, but I think the fact that we're all virtual, they probably won't mind you turning up. You can get information on that at, well, Carrie just put it into the chat. So maybe the other thing I need to tell you before we go further, Carrie's taking notes on all of this, so we'll share that out soon. Our friend Yab Sarah is making notes on Twitter. You can find that under the hashtag Rubber Soul. I'm not throwing any shade. Every Beatles record is good in my book, but Abbey Road is my jam. And Carrie's throwing in some things about locals right now. Denver's meeting, I believe, tomorrow, and Seattle, I think, is Thursday, but y'all are welcome to join them there. Next thing, let's go ahead, Mr. T, take it forward. And this is the other thing, we're going to be talking about this today, but we just wanted to flag for you that there's an op-ed in the Chronicle of Philanthropy that Hugh and Kelly and I put together, sharing out some of the big learnings. And so you're welcome to share that with your colleagues. And that's the link right there. And my guess is Carrie's going to toss it into the chat in just a minute. Mr. Chief will go forward. V versus V plus. So this is the event we're going to be hosting in now 60 some days. It's kind of scary to think about. The network is going to gather because our purpose demands it. Our purpose is to connect and gather and inform our field. Folks working in comms for good. Hey, Maria, hopeful and busy. Good way to be. We're going to gather everybody in late September for V. Everyone's welcome and it's free. Have room for about 2,000 people. We'll make more room if we need to, but a free event featuring all kinds of amazing folks. Go to comnetworkvirtual.org to get more on that, or V+, which we're super duper excited about, which is going to be bringing a smaller group of folks, probably not more than 600, But those 600 will each be divided even further into small groups of 8 to 10 people, and we'll kind of put you into community for an extended experience starting in mid-September, carrying through the elections probably into early December, with a whole bunch of exclusive events just for that community of folks. And the idea is to work alongside for a span of 2-3 months, whatever it's going to be, other folks who work in the field, learning together and also experiencing some of the big things we all see on the horizon, whether that's the election, whether that's work planning for 2021 in the middle of a lot of uncertainty, whether it's some of the other things that we can anticipate coming into the fall that are going to be a challenge for all of us, including potentially another wave of or a bigger wave of COVID-19 landing across the country. All right, Mr. T, if you would, so more on all of that on Com Network Virtual, and we're going to hold a webinar to kind of explain the difference in a little bit more detail in the coming week or two. So if you're still on the fence, stay tuned for that. And you're also welcome to always reach out to us. We're happy to answer your questions. Last thing before we hand it off to Huel and Kelly, we have these wonderful scholarships thanks to our friends at the Rockefeller Foundation. So this year, because we are virtual, we have 50 spaces to offer up to folks who work in the nonprofit or in the academy, work in colleges and universities. And so the idea is we're giving you a free pass to V+. If you know someone who can benefit from this, who maybe doesn't have the means, has seen budgets cut back, whatever it might be, please give them the word. The deadline's coming up this Friday, and so we're accepting applications on a rolling basis, but we want to make sure that we extend that opportunity to as many folks as possible. 25 of those scholarships are going to be reserved for folks working in the South, in Georgia, Atlanta, where we were meant to be this fall, or the broader South. And then the other 25 are global. So it could be folks working elsewhere in the United States or around the world. You all may remember our friend Edith, maybe she's with us right now, came in from Kenya last year. We'd like to have lots more Ediths with us. So if you can help us get the word out, go to comnetworkvirtual.org scholarship. You can share it out. You can also find it on the network social. So thanks for all of that. With that, maybe I should pause because I've yacked too long and invite our friends Kelly and Huel to take it over. I think Kelly's running the deck, so I'm going to pass it to her. Kelly, take it away.
Thank you, Sean. So I've shared my screen here just so that you all can see the deck that we will be presenting today. But I'm Kelly Hohenstein from Atlantic 57, and I'm joined by my colleague Huel. So Huel, if you want to introduce yourself and take it away.
Great. Yeah. Hi. So if we go on to the next slide, we'll get into the research that we've been delighted to work with Sean and the rest of the team on. The first thing I want to say as well is thank you. We spoke to a lot of people in the formation of this work, and then obviously a lot of folks on the line here, and also many others participated and took the survey. So without you, we wouldn't be here, and I know that Sean has sent out many notes of gratitude, and I just want to reiterate those as well. So with that, I'm Huel Mills. I'm a Group Engagement Director at Atlantic 57. Here in DC, also hot, also sort of vaguely overwhelmed. I know that's 3 words, but I'll take the extra one. Prior to working at Atlantic 57, I was at The Guardian in New York, working on their sustainable business platform. And then prior to that, in a life long traveled, I worked in London for a men's health foundation named Movember, raising funds and awareness for men's health. And so Kelly, I'll let you introduce yourself as well a little bit more.
Yeah, thanks, Huel. I'm Kelly Hohenstein. I'm a manager of research here at Atlantic 57, which means that I do a lot of these surveys, but not generally speaking to people like yourselves. So excited to kind of share the results of this instrument with you and talk a little bit about the implications and things that we gleaned from it, and hear, especially hear from all of you, how you can see yourself applying these things, and excited to share with you today.
Before we get into it, though, there is a PSA. There may be some possible cameo performances. Both Kelly and I are parents, and there may or may not be unexpected visitors. So you have been warned, and actually maybe they'll do a better job at presenting and be more entertaining than we are. But the 2 bundles of joy on the left are mine, Teddy and Nico.
And then on the right, you have my son, Graham. So you might be hearing from him as well.
Great. Okay, let's get started. So before we talk about the research, I just want to give you an overview of the Atlantic and Atlantic 57. Now, where to begin is a great question with the Atlantic. So the Atlantic was launched in 1857. I'm sure many of you are familiar with it. It was launched as a journal of literature, politics, science, and the arts. Today, that journalistic heritage continues. And we also stand true to our commitment to non-partisan reporting and storytelling, or as we say, of no party or clique. However, over the last decade or so, the Atlantic has evolved. So for years, the Atlantic was that magazine until it became an idea. And now, today, it's truly a platform, not just for ideas and groundbreaking journalism, but also we work with organizations to build and shape their communications, much like the Atlantic does today. And that's where Atlantic 57 comes in. And if we go to the next slide, we are a brand evolution firm. Our work is powered by insights from the Atlantics, their best practices and their legacy as an influential cultural force. It's also informed by our daily client collaborations, working with many foundations, nonprofits, think tanks, academic institutions, and for-profit organizations as well. We also have a loving exploration of human behavior, and that's steeped in journalism, but also our own audience research. And to do this, to make all this happen, we have a team of experienced designers, editorial experts, creative minds, researchers, business analysts, engineers, and we bring those skills together to, as we have on this screen, design not just for disruption, but for endurance. So that's us. And if we move on to this next slide, I wanted to pull out this quote from Liz Neely just to set the scene for today's discussion. And I'm sure it will resonate with many of you. So it's never been so important to get people to pay attention to hard truths. And perhaps it's never been as difficult to do that as it is right now. The key is to confront the most brutal facts of reality unflinchingly, while maintaining an unwavering hope for the future. Liz here is invoking Vice Admiral James Stockdale. He survived years of torture as a prisoner of war in Vietnam. And he said that the fellow POWs who tried to get by on pure optimism, we'll be all right, we'll free in no time, they ultimately broke down because they were let down repeatedly. So the lesson there is we must have hope, but we must have that melded with realism. We need facts and information to create order out of chaos, but we also need comfort and hope to get us through everything emotionally. And it's that mix of information and compassion that has been shown through and informed much of the Atlantic's response to COVID-19. The Atlantic isn't the biggest publisher in the world, but we have been an industry leader when it's come to the COVID-19 response. Our newsroom responded to the moment by producing vital content and articles and features that have shaped the public conversation and also helped inform personal decisions of our readers. As a result, we've seen a record traffic, and people are also reading longer. Twice as many readers are reading to the end of our articles at the moment, which is a sign of really deep engagement. You can see on this slide here the range of the coverage that we've put together, from scientific roadmaps in the form of how the pandemic will end, to bold assessments of our leaders' response and warnings about what the true impact will be of the crisis, or even first-hand experiences like the ones from the Italian doctors featured in the story on the far right. And as well as reaching new readers and expanding our audience, we've also influenced conversation. So President Barack Obama and Bill Gates were both tweeting Ed Yong's piece. We also heard from the Glossier CEO, who shut down their brick and mortar retail stores earlier than most, as a result of the CEO reading the piece on the Atlantic, cancel everything. She read that one night in bed. The next day, she closed stores as a way of getting ahead of the crisis. So we will go, as we go through the research that I'm going to hand over to Kelly to take you through, we're going to bring out some lessons that are related to what we've seen there from the Atlantic, and hopefully those will help guide some of your responses and some of your thinking about how to inform your own work.
Great, thank you, Huel. So before we get to the research, just a little bit on the run of show, so you have an idea of what's going to be going on. And I'll first cover a little bit about the background and methodology, how we got here, the nuts and bolts of who makes up this survey audience, the respondents that we spoke to. We'll go through 3 key themes and the takeaways, and we'll share some lessons from the Atlantic. Those 3 key themes, we'll have some discussion questions at the end of each of those 3 key themes where we'll ask you to kind of put your answers into the chat, and Sean can pull out some of the main thoughts there. And then at the end, we will have some time for a Q&A. If you have any questions as we're going along, you can definitely put them into the chat as well, and we can go get to those. Or if you have questions at the very end, we can address them then as well. And then I also just want to share that we will be sharing this deck as well. You'll see some charts and things in here, so don't feel like you need to take in all the information right away. We're going to share it so that you can always go back and delve into it at your leisure as well. So let's first talk a little bit about what brought us here and how we got there and who we talked to. So in April and May of 2020, so April and May of this year, the Communications Network and Atlantic 57 designed this survey, and we spoke to communications leaders and people at foundations and nonprofits all across the country. And the goal of it was really at the start of this pandemic, right in April, to understand how communications leaders nationwide are responding to COVID-19 and how they're kind of navigating the disruption that's resulted from it. So we ultimately spoke to 275 communications leaders, and we'll dive into who they are a little bit deeper right at the end of April and into May. So leaders from across the country are included as part of this research, and for the most part, they are female. And most work for a nonprofit or a foundation. So 47% from nonprofit and about 1/3 from foundations, although we did have some inclusion from other organizations as well. And there's a little bit more about the breakdown of foundations in the subtext down at the bottom. So 10% from an independent national or global foundation, 8% from a family foundation, 7% from an independent regional foundation, and so on. So a good representation of organization type as well here. And then organization and communications team size really vary widely, but what we see is about half of respondents are working at organizations with fewer than 25 employees, and half are working on really lean communications teams of typically fewer than 3. So really small groups here. So thinking about the timing of our research, this research took place right in between 2 major events in our history and things that we're experiencing now. So what this research provides is a window into the mindset and actions of communicators during the pandemic and on the eves of the uprising over police brutality and systemic racism. So what we identified are 3 key themes, which will look really familiar to you if you've had a chance to read the Chronicle of Philanthropy piece that Sean talked about. But we're going to center our presentation today around these key themes and then share some lessons that we can glean from those. So the first theme that we'll cover today is that communications is critical. So communications teams have played a central role in helping organizations navigate COVID-19. And that includes largely taking responsibility for internal communications. So you can see the chart here on the right side. 45% say that they or their team is responsible for all or most internal communications, and another 31% say that their team is responsible for some. And at the same time that these communications teams are handling these critical internal communications, they're really increasing the cadence with which they're communicating externally. So the furthest left bar, the dark blue one, shows the percentage who say they have increased external communications of a specific type from their organization since the outbreak of COVID-19. So 64% had increased website updates, 43% increased social media posts, and so on and so forth. So doing this with a really lean team, in addition to handling that internal communication as well, you can see how big of a burden and how much there is to kind of cover during this time. So as organizations are sharing these more frequent communications, they're doing so with an eye to the external audiences on which they're focused. So as they're increasing these website posts or blog posts, those sorts of things, they're directing these communications to the groups that they typically work with. And so communicating with the general public at least a few times a week, if not weekly, similar for board members and community partners, all the way down. And we can see that those at foundations are more likely to have communicated with grantees at least weekly compared to nonprofits, while those at nonprofits are more likely to have communicated with funders at least weekly. And something else that's available on the ComNet website as well is some crosstabs that show some breakdowns by things like this, foundations versus nonprofits or size of organization. So all that data is available as well if that's of interest to you. So as I said, all of this increase in volume and velocity has meant that some organizations have developed a working group in response to the COVID-19 crisis to kind of help manage this. So 69% say that they've developed an internal working group to help navigate during this time. And those at larger organizations are more likely to have developed a group compared to smaller organizations. And these groups typically have a variety of different business functions represented, but what we see overwhelmingly is that most of them have input from the highest leadership at the organization. So 94% say that leadership or someone from their senior executive team is represented in this working group. And representation in these working groups vary by organization size and type, and more business functions are commonly represented in larger organizations in comparison to smaller organizations. And then we can see some of the differences between foundations and nonprofits here over on the right-hand side as well. So when it comes to the type of communication support or resources that are being shared externally, we see that they tend to center on opinion pieces or general thought leadership, while fewer organizations indicate that they're providing guidance to external audiences in ways to navigate COVID-19. So up at the top, we see general thought leadership and opinion pieces, communications relevant information created by health organizations like the CDC or NIH, and then online convenings to offer support or training. Those are the ones that we're seeing most frequently. So that brings us to our first lesson.
Great, yeah, thank you, Kelly. And then I think the question of what resources to offer audiences really kind of brings us to this point where lesson one is position your organization for service, which for many of you in your line of work might probably will feel quite natural. But we've also recently heard from many organizations about how they are here for you in this moment. But one of the benefits that you will have already being positioned for this kind of lesson is that you also know that real impact from an organization also must be backed up by real action. You also know that communications can be a critical strategic tool in creating impact and sharing the messages and sharing out the work that you do. In top of that, right now, there is even a heightened need for trusted messages and messengers. So when we talk about the importance of position your organization for service, it's not only a mission critical for organizations, but it is also timely. As our staff writer, Amanda Mull, puts it on the next slide, there might be a certain appeal in hearing clear, useful information from whatever powerful American institutions are willing to supply it right now, when guidance from the US government has been slow, inconsistent, and confusing. As we say, Americans are eager for organizations to provide information and want them to help them navigate this time. 89% said brands should provide reliable, accurate information, according to a recent survey by Twitter of its users. At The Atlantic, we're trying to do that for our audiences as well right now. At the very least, we believe that if we can provide useful information to audiences, we're doing something well. And audiences seem to appreciate the effort too. We've been offering most of our coronavirus coverage for free as a service. because we think it is valuable, but we also think that it is important that it gets to as many people as possible. And even though we've been giving that away for free, our subscriptions have gone up or our subscriptions went up by 300% in March and April. So there is value in that mutual relationship. And then if we think about what being of service means and how we might think about what that means in terms of communications and the information we're putting out there, we looked at 3 key components of the Atlantic's coverage and pulled those out as a starting point for you to sort of think about your own frameworks. So number 1, an original idea. What news story, perspective, or guidance can we provide? Here, this example, calling me a hero only makes you feel better, is a first-person essay from a Trader Joe's employee in Portland. She suggests that the collective effort to deem essential workers as heroes really clouds the risk and dangers they're facing in their jobs. She said, cashiers and delivery truck drivers aren't heroes, she writes. They're victims. And the next one, and I think this is really important for us all to think about, is credible expertise. Are our messengers trusted? Now, within the foundation and nonprofit world, there is an abundance of great information, reliable messengers, and I think getting their ideas, getting their information out there is a real opportunity and a real imperative, even, as it were, for communicators. Now, in our instance, the Atlantic journalism is always backed by experts, by fact-checking. And Ed Yong's piece, How the Pandemic Will End, is a great example of this. He interviewed 22 different health experts and scientists for this piece. And he was also given more than 2 weeks to put this piece together, which in the media world is a lifetime. But we resisted the urge to put out something faster that would be of less value. Finally here, what's the emotional alignment with your audiences? Are you acknowledging their fears, curiosities, hopes, their stress? In David Brooks's new column, on the art of happiness, he has this example here, which is the equations for a happy life, even during a pandemic. And he's been pulling on research into what makes people happy and offering practical guidance on how to pursue happiness, even during the most challenging of times. Now, as I said, this framework is something that you could take on yourselves, but the important thing is you play to your own strengths as an organization and ask yourselves the questions: are you being of service during your communications with your audiences? And now I'm going to pass back to Kelly, and we're going to go through a few questions and look to you to provide some input as well and responses to the survey.
Thanks, you all. So what we have here are a few different questions that we hope you can share within your organization, with your colleagues. But what we want to focus on today is just a couple of them with you, since we only have a little bit of time together. So just based on this past little section of data that we reviewed, we're interested in hearing from you. How has the volume and velocity of your communications output changed? And where have you seen successes with your external communications? So as we saw in those first few data points, so much more communication is going out, both internally and externally, and going out much faster than it needed to in the past. So what are some changes that you've seen? Feel free to put things like that in the chat, and we'll take the next 2 to 3 minutes, gather some responses, and then we can call out a few of those before we move on to the next theme.
And everybody, as you're putting those in, please make sure you're putting them in the chat. Make sure you're talking to all panelists and attendees. And again, we'll give you, 160 seconds, something like that, to just sort of throw a few things in there. The 2 questions, answer both or either. How has the volume and velocity of your communications output at your organization changed? So just if you can testify to that. And then where have you seen successes with external comms? And don't be shy. We're going to lean on each other to do a little bit of learning here. We know these things have shifted, but we'd love to hear testimonies from you, how that's happened for you in the last couple of months. And I'm just going to start repeating some stuff out so folks can type, but they can hear what others are saying. Sarah says, total buy-in for social media communication, more frequent and much more successful engaged audiences. So moving into social, I'm going to assume, Sarah, that was not the case previously. Abby says, our successes come through our good news stories, telling tales of our grantees doing new positive work in spite of COVID. Yeah, There's a lot of data out there. It says good news really travels fast and far. Jenny says more and faster. I'm gonna try to keep up with y'all. There's a real need to respond to concerns as they arrive. So that pace of change, that pace of communications accelerated, and we saw that in the data. Jennifer says, we saw a real increase in volume of internal communications and a decrease in external for a while, but now that's ramped back up. Y'all may have seen this. There was a note from our friends at Edelman who did a really quickie trust barometer early on in the pandemic. And what they found was Americans were leaning on their employers to help them stay safe. That was the most trusted voice that they found to gather information about the pandemic. Maybe that's shifted, but that's certainly where we were a couple of months ago. Kirsten says, we created a resource page for our partners with the latest research, guidance, and statements. We also changed our monthly newsletter to be weekly so we could push this content out to our partners. Maria says, Facebook Live, especially with Spanish and Portuguese speaking communities. I assume that's a new thing for y'all, Maria, but that's a fantastic idea. Carly says, our volume has increased as we continue science during the pandemic. She's at Schmidt Ocean. We've actually had broader interest and success with our non-COVID related science as people look for an alternative in good news stories, especially animal and discovery stories. I'll read a couple more of these. Katie says communications immediately increased in the spring, but have slowed down more than what we would have previously considered to be normal as we moved into the reopening phases. And Cindy says, answering where have you seen successes? Helping others communicate better. She's been offering free webinars and blog posts through her organization. David says weekly updates. He's with Cal Wellness, weekly updates on COVID, public health perspective, also how it impacts other issues where we fund. And at Cal Wellness, that's health of immigrant communities, gun violence prevention, and other issues. Tanya, our friend, former board member from RWJF, says the volume has exploded, and at RWJF, we have had to be okay with our CEO being positioned as the former head of CDC more often than as our current CEO. We figured that was okay in order for RWJF to get credible public health info out right now. And our friend Anusha at the Wikimedia Foundation says, volume has stayed the same, but we've shifted our focus to ensure that we were meeting audience needs. We saw an opportunity to help people get access to CO, and I'm not sure quite what that acronym stands for. Maybe you can clarify, Anusha. Other questions in there, you can see we're about to run out of time. Y'all have been really great. Access to COVID info globally, especially in harder to reach places. Thank you, Anusha. Let's leave it there. We're going to move forward, but y'all can check out the chat and see what you all are saying to one another. Thank you for doing that. Hey, everybody, just please do make sure we're going to ask you for this kind of feedback a couple more times. Please make sure you've got your things set, your chat box set to all panelists and attendees so we can all read what y'all are sharing with us. And thank you very much for everybody who chimed in. Kelly, I'll pass it back to you.
Great, thank you, Sean. Thanks for sharing, everyone. And like Sean said, lots more in the chat, so feel free to check those out. We're going to move on to the next theme, which is that change is ongoing, surprising nobody. So what we see, the majority of organizations indicate that COVID-19 has disrupted at least a portion of their 2020 plans, and that they've had to adapt their goals and priorities in response to the pandemic. So I expect this feels familiar to a lot of you. 21% say that our goals and priorities have shifted completely, and another 62% say that our goals and priorities have shifted at least somewhat. And organizations have also shown significant agility so far in their response to COVID-19 when it comes to communications, most indicating that their organization has been at least fairly flexible in their approach. So 98% here say that there has been some flexibility in adjusting communications in response to the pandemic. And the ways that those goals and priorities have changed are really varied, but one of the top ways that we see is the ways that organizations organize or convene has changed. So 78% say that the way that they're organizing or convening has changed. We've also seen adjustments in goals and priorities, including things that people talk about, so the messages that they hope to amplify this year, the stories that we tell about our work, and then the tactics, the communications tactics that we use or have planned to use have changed. So lots of different ways that goals and priorities have had to be adjusted as a result of the changes in the landscape. So although target audiences are unlikely to have changed, as we saw on the previous slide, that was at the very bottom, the tactics that are being employed to actually reach them have been adapted as a result of the changing landscape and the outbreak of the virus and the wide-reaching effects that have really spanned all sorts of different things. So at least, let's see, so 18% say that communications tactics have changed a lot, and 55% say that they've changed at least a little. So there's lots of different ways that people are evolving their habits and media usage. The tactics have also been adapted to reflect that. Similarly, like we're seeing today, many organizations have specifically pivoted approaches toward an important piece of their business, events, by taking convenings virtual. So nearly 9 and 10 communications leaders say that events and convenings are at least fairly important to their business. And 71% say that they've converted some in-person events or convenings into virtual gatherings. And even in the weeks since fielding this survey, it's expected that thinking around in-person meetings has continued to evolve as governments and organizations push back opening plans, reopen and then reclose, audiences kind of settle into virtual routines, both for safety and convenience. We're seeing a lot of different changes. But going back to the events, I want to highlight over here on the right-hand side, 79% of business event planners are planning to redesign an existing face-to-face event in the next 3 months to be either partially or completely virtual, which of course has different implications as well. So where are people and communications leaders turning to help find resources on managing communications during this time? So what we're seeing is that most say that it's at least somewhat easy to find external resources that are focused on this. It's readily available. And where are those sources specifically? So while slightly more leaders say that they rely on external sources specifically when they're looking for information, many say that they use both internal and external communications sources for guidance about equally. So both of them have their information, and they're really valuable in different ways. And then even more specifically, respondents indicate that they use a variety of sources, including peer networks and official government organizations, suggesting that there really is no one-stop comprehensive source, that there are a lot of resources and a lot of places that you can turn to help guide communications efforts during this time. So that brings us to our second lesson here.
Great, thank you. And as we leave the section about changes ongoing, we wanted to think about what we might want to keep from the changes that are underway. And one thing that we have seen and would recommend others keeping true to is stay nimble. And I've got an example here of that from the Atlantic for you. So now's the time and to remove hurdles and break down silos and eliminate red tape. In fact, many of the people we spoke to were pretty surprised by themselves and by their own organizations at foundations of how quickly, in the matter of hours, if not days, things changed within their own internal communications and their own structures to embrace or at least adapt to work from home. So let's stay nimble. Let's take the good things that have happened here. And from the Atlantic, one of those good things was the launch of the Social Distance podcast, which, if you haven't listened to it, it's a simple premise. A daily conversation between two friends in New York, Catherine, a podcast producer, and her friend and colleague, Jim Hamlin, a licensed non-practicing physician. They talked, they called. The idea came about from a conversation between Catherine and Adrian LaFrance, our editor. The next day, a Skype call happened. It was recorded. The following day, Social Distance was up online, available for download, and has been going strong ever since. Podcasts at the Atlantic typically take weeks, years in the planning and making to get out there. This one happened almost instantly, and it's been a great success, from those rambling chats at the beginning to featured experts from the Atlantic, and even Catherine's own brother, who is an out-of-work bartender now. It received more than 300,000 downloads in the first few weeks and is still going today. So please check it out. They adapted themselves. They stayed nimble. They moved to three days a week rather than 5. And it's the lo-fi quality that has met the moment. So if we can tear up our own playbook for podcasts, what can you do? What can you move forward quickly and embrace that nimble spirit?
So again, some questions that we're happy for you to share with your organization, but we want to focus on just a couple today. So the first is, has your organization been able to react in flexible and nimble ways over the past 4 months, and what has that looked like for you? And then where have you looked to find information and assistance to aid your response to recent events? So go ahead and start putting some of those in the chat, and then we'll have Sean share a few of them.
And again, gang, please do make sure as you're doing so that you're making these available for all panelists and attendees, that's how you're set up. But the questions are, how has your organization been able to react in flexible and nimble ways? So examples like the social distance podcast from the Atlantic, or frankly, what the network's been doing over the last couple of months in terms of our COVID response. And where have you looked to find information and assistance to help you out? Put those into the chat so that we can all learn from each other, please. We'll give ourselves about 2 minutes to do this, 2.5 minutes. I'm going to try to read these out and not be too quick about it. Rebecca says, we've been having to be incredibly flexible with moving our conference online, learning on the fly, and using resources from event planners, other organizations, listservs, etc. And Kirsten says, we shifted 2 3-day in-person international workshops into a series of 4-hour online meetings. Yeah, I think that's everyone's having that experience. You all know from our own experience within the network. V was not something we were thinking about come January or February. Others, if you'd like to weigh in, ways that your organizations have been able to react that show your flexibility or how you've been able to be nimble. And then where are you looking for information? Caroline shares, we were able to create new videos, first by remixing footage we already had, and last week by doing a remote shoot. I was amazed that we were able to do that. Lisa shares, quick pivot from in-person workshop conference to a virtual event. Meeting Professionals International, she says, has some great resources to help with this. And Abby shares, we've added a ton of COVID-related funding to our grantees, which is something obviously probably wasn't part of the work plan or the strategy at the beginning of the year. Others, if you want to weigh in, happy to hear your thoughts. Cindy shares some resources she's been using. She's been looking for nonprofit communications experts. Examples there would be the Network, Nonprofit Marketing Guide, Julia Campbell, and an organization called Big Duck, and then Field Leaders. For her, that's the National Trust for Historic Preservation, California Preservation Foundation. So a mix of peers and then those that sort of cross-pollinate books like the Network. Let's give ourselves another 30 seconds or so, and then we'll move on to theme and then lesson number 3. All right, why don't we go ahead and move ahead, Kelly, and for others, we can check into the chat, continue to offer those ideas up.
Perfect. So our third and final theme that we will talk through today is that storytelling must adapt. So communications leaders overwhelmingly acknowledge that there will be permanent narrative changes as a direct result of COVID-19. So following COVID-19 recovery, 18% expect that their organization's narrative to change in a permanent way a great deal, and another 57% say that their organization's narrative will change permanently, at least somewhat, as a result of the pandemic. And similarly, it's also widely acknowledged that narrative changes more broadly can be expected. So 29% believe that the narratives that underpin the issues that they work on will change in a permanent way, and another 50% believe that they'll change at least somewhat, so somewhat and a great deal there, which really leaves organizations to question when they can begin to pivot away from directly COVID relevant content and focus on other initiatives instead. So despite questions about when the pivot should be made, we see that a lot of people feel that there are a number of key social areas that are really primed for opportunity given the current crisis. And this gives an opportunity to use the broad scope of the pandemic to drive conversations about related priority topics. I think we heard a little bit about that in someone's response to the first set of discussion questions, but we can see over here these top 5 bars plus the next 5 after that, at least a third are saying that there are so many areas that present an opportunity to capture momentum and drive progress forward. And we've already seen a lot of that: public health, racial equity, economic opportunity, social justice, the role of government. All of this is really coming to be true. And there is, of course, more opportunity to capture that momentum and continue moving things forward. So as goals and tactics have evolved to meet the moment, it's really become more necessary to be intentional with the tone of communications externally. And so that means that many organizations are aiming to meet the audience's need for information and reassurance during what's a highly uncertain time. So organizations are striving for tone that ranges from informative to empathetic to encouraging to steadfast, those sorts of things that kind of again, provide this reassurance during a really unsteady time. And in the same way that tone has evolved, many organizations have also changed their narrative approach to ensure that stories feel relevant and don't feel tone deaf right now. So 81% say that their stories have been reframed to include COVID-19 related themes, experiences, or insights. 61 are focused on ensuring storytelling feels relevant. 43% are actively listening and seeking more input from the communities we serve. So that's where we want to take a little bit of a deeper dive here. So 43% is fewer than half that say they're actively listening and seeking input from their audiences, which suggests that there's a way to kind of more closely connect with and understand how communities are faring. So that brings us to our third and final lesson here.
Great, thank you. And yes, that amount of listening really is something we want to focus in on here, and we can discuss more. But our lesson there is match your mindset to your audience's mindset. Now, I think that's important at any time, but when we're facing one crisis, or in the case of America right now, several ongoing crises, checking in and listening to your audiences is as vital as it's ever been. And if we go on to the next slide, Kelly, I wanted to highlight ways in which the Atlantic did this ourselves. So once the pandemic was underway in early March, we launched quickly an audience survey via email, through our website and social media. For your own organizations, research can take a number of forms. It can be as formal as our approach, but it can also be informal. And as the survey results showed, I think any increase in listening is going to be a good thing, and there is a real need to do that. So for our survey purposes, we were really trying to understand audience needs. And I'm going to go through this first example, and then we'll go on, because I want to preserve time for questions. But this first example was understanding. That was the core insight there, was understanding how the US and other governments were responding to the crisis, which was in line with other trends we saw around most read articles. But audiences wanted to know what leaders are doing and whether ultimately their mindset was, is this under control? And so articles like What's Behind Korea's COVID-19 Exceptionalism gave a window into how others were handling it and how others were succeeding. So in the interest to preserve some time for questions, Kelly, let's skip through these examples, but we'll share them, and let's land on something of a brighter note, because as well as some of the serious things that people were looking to the Atlantic for, we also found that people need to pass the time, and were looking to us for a diversion, and we tried our best to enrich their lives. So that might have been around, I got a pandemic puppy and you can too, or unexpected movie masterpieces to watch in quarantine that include Hulk and Babe, Pig in the City, from our very experienced critic. And then last of all, and to bring us back to the start, we asked Dave Grohl, a DMV favorite, to provide a soundtrack to get you through the pandemic. And it landed on Hope, and it landed on Here Comes the Sun by the Beatles. So I think all of these different ways were related to our audience's mindset, what they needed, but it started with checking in with them first. So let's get to some questions again, and then we can open up the floor for more discussion as well.
Great.
And as we're doing questions, gang, if you don't mind, let's put those into the Q&A box. So that's, again, if you go down to the bottom of your screen, you've been all in the chat. That's wonderful. But I'm going to be looking in the Q&A box for questions. And Try to stump us if you can. We'll try to do it as best as we can here.
Kelly, should we do, we can do the first questions as well on the last slide, the couple of questions if people want those as well around what they've been up to.
Sure. So some of the questions we thought might be interesting for this group specifically are what opportunities, if any, have you taken to listen to the communities and audiences that you serve? And then how has your organization begun to address broader societal issues in its communications in light of COVID-19 and recent protests against racial inequity? So feel free to either put things in the chat or in the Q&A as well. And we're happy to answer both of those questions.
So questions for us in the Q&A box and reactions to these two questions we're putting to you in the chat function.
We're fully embracing the full platform capabilities of the
We
webinar
are. We didn't throw
today.
poll at you. But otherwise, yeah, we're trying to play a little bit today with y'all.
And thank you for participating so far. It's great. It's great to see what everyone's up to.
And like I mentioned at the top of this, we'll share this deck out. And so please, the results are here. Please share them more broadly with your team. You're welcome to commandeer these survey discussion questions and use them for fodder to start conversations within your own organization, within your own teams. So please do so.
And I'm really curious, here we go, some folks starting to jump in here, but particularly how's your organization begun to address some of the broader issues? Y'all may have seen the independent sector poll that came out now a couple of weeks back. We cited it in our recent Chronicle op-ed, but the finding there was, I think 78%, if I've got that number right, 76, 78% of nonprofits were deeply trusted as forces for good in society by Americans of every ideological stripe and across the country, geographic and every other kind of diversity you might imagine. Number was slightly lower for foundations. About 64% of folks reported they saw foundations as a really trusted and important source in civic life. And so how have you all been adjusting? I see a couple things here. You can read these for yourselves. If you have questions, again, please put those into the Q&A box. But I'll read back a couple of things. Rebecca shares, our ED is in conversation with many members, and our membership team is taking time to reach out to each member organization individually so we can be serving them to the best of our ability. So that's that kind of listening that we need to be doing. Kirsten shares, we've convened several calls of our different partner groupings to learn about what obstacles they were facing in delivering their programs, which shaped our resource page and a series of webinars. So listening and then acting makes a lot of good sense. Cindy says, with regard to opportunities, we did advanced surveys to identify what webinar guests wanted me to discuss, the top challenges they were facing right now. And Stephen shares with us, we've added racial inequities as a key frame on many of our COVID-19 posts. And we also have issued an organizational statement on systemic racism and also did an analysis on the racial inequities in California across health, education, economic opportunity, etc. Again, I think this is also a big reflection, gang, as you're looking at these of the agility that we've seen from so many organizations. These simply weren't part of anybody's work plan come July, or actually January, right? But they are in July, and a reflection that we're all in this shape, incredibly resilient organizations that are being incredibly flexible and nimble. Other things that people have been doing to listen. Jenny says, membership surveys, Zoom town hall meetings. And Cindy shares, board members are reaching out to members of so board members taking the time to pick up the phone and actually call people, which is pretty amazing. Maria shares, healthcare for all Massachusetts, we've expanded our communication strategies and policy work to address other issues, such as declaring racism as a public health crisis and doing that publicly and in the press. Really impressive stuff. Yeah, it is amazing to see all the different shifts that we are witnessing across so many different organizations. That culture of resilience, that culture of agility, not oftentimes what we think of our organizations. Maybe we were thinking about this last fall, but certainly a marker of what a lot of us have experienced recently. Anusha shares, we made a strong commitment to advancing racial justice in our work alongside previous commitments to close equity gaps in our projects, which is one of two major pillars of our 2030 strategy. And she shares that that is all part of the Wikimedia Foundation's work that they're doing across the globe. Questions, we still have a couple of minutes left. If anybody has questions they want to put to us or to others, let's put that in the Q&A box. And again, we're happy to answer those in the time we have remaining. The other thing, as we are waiting for folks to put questions in, as we should share with you, we intend to, or at least we certainly hope to do another one of these surveys in the coming months, because we do understand this is a very, very fluid situation. So we're grateful to everybody, as Hugh said at the outset, for folks who participated and shared during a very, very confusing and difficult time. And we're going to ask that again of you, just because we know some of the practices that people were starting to move into early mid-spring are now becoming, common practices, and perhaps the way we're going to work for the next 6, 8, 12, 18 months or beyond. Some of these things presumably will be permanent features of how we operate going forward. Will the slides be available? Anita asks. Yes, we will make the slides available, and we are recording this webinar as we always do. It'll be up on the network's YouTube channel, and our friends from A57, I presume, will be sharing it as well. Probably have that available for turnaround within the next, give us a couple hours, but certainly by sometime tomorrow. I see a question in the box. Cindy asks, how can we use these results to demonstrate the value of strategic communications to our organization? So in other words, how do we operationalize this survey? How does it help people? Huel or Kelly? You guys are trained researchers. You want to share with us? How do we put this in front of the boss and say, look at this, we need to be doing this, or we're not doing this, we need to be doing more, whatever it may be.
Kelly, I have some ideas, but is there anything that you've seen in your work with organizations that help kind of share information internally?
Yeah, something that I think that this deck could really be helpful with is not only does it have those results, but it has those discussion questions that I think can kind of spark those initial conversations about here's what I think we're doing well, here's what I heard in this webinar other people are doing, and opportunities for growth as well. These are some of the sources that I've seen. So I think that there definitely is an opportunity to use this data to talk about the things that others are doing and what your organization could be doing. But you're excited to hear what you think as well.
Yeah, I think that's right. And one of the reasons that discussion point is really helpful is that the answers are being worked out in real time by everyone. I think from our perspective as well, one of the things that it really highlights is something we talk to a lot of organizations about is both you have two users, you have two audiences. One is internal, one is external. And I think we have an opportunity to use these working groups, this new operating model to bring those two together when perhaps they've been siloed before. So communications seemingly from these results have got an elevated seat at the table, because especially with COVID, it was a communications crisis in many respects. So let's show now how important that is, both in terms of the place within an organization and making sure that everyone is aligned, everyone has the information they need, but also elevating experts, elevating program teams in a way that meets the needs of your audiences. So I think all of those things can help you have those discussions internally.
Yeah, I think the two things I would point to as being incredibly valuable or worthy of sharing with others are, one, I think that they're both sort of deficit based. So just to own this right quick. One is there wasn't a lot of listening happening early in the pandemic, and that probably makes a lot of sense. Many organizations that were well equipped to work in a real world environment struggled to make that transition into a digital or a virtual working workspace. But it is absolutely essential. If you're in the communications business, it starts with listening. It's the old line Michelle Norris shared with us in Miami. We got two of these and one of these for a reason. So listening is essential. If that's not been part of your practice, it needs to be going forward. And there's some data that we can offer you that shares that you're not alone if you're not doing that work. The other thing I think that's really essential is for all of us to look at some of the narratives that we anticipate shifting. I think Kelly and Huel and I were particularly struck by the number of people who recognized in advance of the murder of George Floyd, maybe in some ways presaging some of the responses that we've seen in society, some of the demonstrations we've seen erupting around the country, around the world, was the second most, the second biggest narrative shift that many people expected as a result of the pandemic was around racial equity. And so when the murder occurred by Minneapolis police, I think many of us probably were reflective of broader society, that we were primed to have the kind of response that we've seen. But those two events and many others that will probably unfold, including the elections this fall, I think are going to help to reshape some narratives in deep ways, much as 9/11 did. And so I think we all need to be prepared for the idea that however we defined our work and the narrative frameworks in which we've been operating, many of those are now open for adjustment. And so we need to be prepared for that. And some of us are making those changes in real time. Others are being a bit more reflective. But I think that we all need to be mindful. There's a massive sense that there's a big transition underway. Some of it's going to be durable. It's going to endure well into the future. We are at the top of the hour, so we should probably let y'all run. Kelly or Huel, any final questions? You can also, of course, ask both of these folks for their thoughts and insights, and they've been kind enough to share their contact information just down there below. And you can find them on Twitter as well, I expect. Any questions or closing parting thoughts, Mr. Huel, Ms. Kelly? And we didn't see Graham or Teddy or Nico, so I'm a little disappointed we didn't get any short people showing up to be with us.
That makes me nervous that they've been so quiet. So thank you, everyone. I as I said, it's been a pleasure to understand what's going on, provide a forum for discussion, and also share these results. So we look forward to keeping the conversation going. We appreciate your time.
Thank you, everyone.
All right, thanks everybody. Be safe and well, and we will be back tomorrow. Fair count, the folks who are working on the census. Scary number to part with, so you make sure you tune in to join us. We'll send a new invitation out shortly. There's an estimate right now that the African-American community, the Black community in America, is being undercounted by apparently about 15% relative to where expectations were, where actuarial tables tell us we ought to be. So there is a crisis brewing there, because that has again, an enduring impact. The census has a big bearing on how we all allocate resources and make investments as a society, as a government. And we're in big trouble there, it seems. So tune in to learn more about that tomorrow. Janine Abrams McLean, Stacey Abrams' sister, and her counterpart, Rebecca, will be joining us, and we'll get an invite out to you very, very soon. For now, be safe and well. Thanks for being with us. Deck and recording coming very, very soon. Cheers.